Yes.
Okay. Mine's on the highly debated issue of global warming. Scientists are basically split on if humans aid global warming or not. And the last decade or so, it's gained a lot of popularity amongst activists and whatnot. My main claim is that recent human behavior has an insignificant effect on global warming, and that's because the global changes are part of a natural cycle. It's been shown that the temperature has been constantly changing throughout its history in the past couple thousand years. Examples of this are the medieval warm period between the 10th and the late 12th century, where it's abnormally hot and it suddenly became hot out of nowhere. And that period was followed immediately by the mini ice age, and that was during the 13th century, and it had a series of extremely cold and snowy sequences all the way through the 16th century. Also, the temperatures dropped during the mid-1940s and 1970s, and that's at a point where, according to global warming activists, that's where they should have been higher, but they actually dropped down in temperature. And actually, during the 70s and then up until the 90s, there was a huge scare of there being an ice age. And it was estimated that thousands of people had died from the weather being too cold, and they estimated there would be an ice age by the year 2000 that would cause chaos and many deaths. Also, that area was called the global cooling period, and it was similar to the scare of the global warming period we have now, where it gained popular attention but was embellished by some and misunderstood because they didn't understand the cycles of the ice age. There's numerous claims that has been presented about global warming, and they've been falsified claims and embellished claims, such as one by a scientist named Michael Mann, who made something called the hockey stick graph, where it's basically they have the temperatures constant for a while, and then all of a sudden they spike up, like a hockey stick, the blade of a hockey stick. And the National Academy of Sciences agreed that there's a warm period in the 20th century, but the rest of the data could not be agreed with, and claimed that it showed no proof of the data. Also, there's one of the main facts that activists claim that we cause global warming is that because of our CO2 emissions that we release, and CO2 actually has a very minuscule influence on global temperatures. There are reports of how much the emission of gases our country and every household is responsible for, but providing staggering numbers is different than showing how the numbers have an effect on the atmosphere. And even though they can claim all the numbers that we release in the United States, that it's actually the carbon dioxide only takes up about 0.037% of the atmosphere, or 370 ppm. And for carbon dioxide to even be considered dangerous, it would have to be at 15,000 ppm. So it's obviously not close to where it could be dangerous, considered dangerous. And this shows the natural processes of the Earth are a lot stronger than what we can do to cause damage to the Earth. And basically, if weathermen can't be sure of what's going to happen with the weather in the next week or so, then how can they be making claims about what's going to be happening in the next century? Thank you.
Right, you started off pretty effectively with a good, clear statement of what the proposition was, but then you just dove right into the secondary issues. There's no setup of what the structure is going to be. It sounds like your first argument is a challenge to the way in which the global warming and cooling cycles have been explained by scientists, and you need a clearer explanation of what the problem is. We also need some data on those particular points. Now, you mentioned, for instance, a mini ice age. You talk about a period of warming, and then you talk about the 1940s. I've got no source citation on any of that information. Later on, you do have one particular piece of information that you were specific in criticizing. That's the hockey stick graph that you mentioned. And you do have, this is the one place where I did see a source citation being presented, a criticism from the National Academy of Sciences that says that the data supporting it is not adequate. Okay, so that's the one piece of information. It applies to that one particular graph. But as far as making an inference about the rest of the issue based on the criticism of that one graph, I think it's underwhelming. You need some better evidence on those points. I know that you got this information about the 0.370 parts per million versus the 15,000 parts per million from somewhere, but I got no source citation on that. And it sounds to me like the 15,000 parts per million is not really about whether or not it causes warming, but rather not whether it's toxic as a level in the atmosphere. So that seems like it might be a separate issue. I do think that you've got a legitimate comparison to make that says it's difficult to make these kinds of predictions, that there is some inability to do that consistently. You make a reference back to the predictions in the 70s about cooling, and again, I think you need some source citations on that. It wouldn't be hard to find some of that information, whether they're national magazines or newspapers that reported on those issues and talk about how in the long run that turned out not to be accurate, and then you draw the analogy to what's going on right now and say, look, the chances that they got it accurate in the past were bad. I believe the same thing is problematic here. And then talk about why the data that is being presented on this is inadequate. You've got an argument here. There are ideas here, but they're not completely developed. You have a tendency to look down the whole time you're speaking. You need to kind of look up and project at the audience and talk to us as human beings. You're kind of talking at us instead of with us, and that's a little bit problematic. All right, thank you.